Hello, this is Vince again. This is going to be another brief posting prior to going on another trip. It's going to entail two voice recordings over pilots and controllers talking about the use of the offset localizer, a screen capture of the use of the offset localizer during triple approaches in poor weather, an email about a concerned tower supervisor in conducting a specific air traffic flow, and the condition of the approach lights. I'll be back here momentarily with that. So the first thing I'm going to cover about the approach lights are these are logs from what they call tech ops, technical operations, and they're responsible of every facet of the facility and the condition of it. So things as simple as this: lights in the junction level men's room are out of service, so they cover everything. Anytime you see ALS, that means approach lighting system. So everything I'm going to talk about in this segment has to do with the approach lighting system. And as you can see here, this dates back to 2021, and this has been going on for many decades. Runway 4 left in alarm, and that's one of the runways we use an offset localizer to. Runway 3 right's in alarm and 4 right's in alarm. Next document, runway 4 right, ALS out of service. Runway 22 right, out of service. Runway 4 left, ALS failure in step 1. Runway 3 right, unmonitored. Runway 3 right and 4 right, ALS, are in failure. Now this next one is what they call the engine generator. And what happens is we have to turn the generator on during certain weather conditions and certain approaches. So if there's a power failure, the generator will continue to work and give us the approach lights. Now there's a panel in the tower. When we turn it on, it lets us know that it's on. That panel is out, so we do not know whether the engine generator is working or not. Sometimes we have to send somebody out to look at it. Sometimes they have somebody, sometimes they don't. So that portion isn't even working. The 3 right, out of service. Runway 3 right, the panel is showing it in failure. 2-1 left approach lights reported to be flashing by multiple aircraft. Runway 3 right, ALS flashers, out of service. Runway 4 left flashers, out of service. So what this means is they have no idea what the condition of the approach lights are when they're turned on in poor weather because we can't see them. So that forces the controllers to ask pilots in critical phases of flight if they have the approach lights inside or not, or do you see them or don't see them. And I'll have some recordings, not in this segment, but later on, where they'll say, yes, they're on, but this many lights are out, or yes, they're on, this section is out. So during a critical phase of flight, that's the exchanges that pilots and controllers are having. So if the approach lights are out of service, or certain sections of it are out of service, or consider it then out of service, what happens is they raise the minimums and the ceiling and the visibility for that approach. So if there are 200, it goes up to 400 or 300, or increases it by a half a mile or a quarter mile. I'm not exactly sure what the regulation is, but they do raise those minimums. Now, what happens is when those systems are out, a NOTAM is supposed to be put out saying this isn't working. And then we put along an automated system loop that informs a pilot of such as well. Let him know that the minimums have raised. I do not believe that is going on at Detroit. So pilots are coming into the facility with the assumption that the approach lights are working. And the reason they don't want to put that out is because it would have to come off that offset localizer and impact their capacity. So remember, capacity, then efficiency, then safety. That's really what all of this is about. And this needs to get corrected. So I'm going to move on to the emails next. Now we're going to move on to the emails, and some of this stuff isn't grammatically correct, so I'll try to read it properly. They first start with the runway 3 right approach light system. And you can see what they say. It's still not fully functional. They clean up one issue, another one pops up. What do we need to do to escalate the replacement of the system? They have no more overtime. And if they continue with this replacement game, it would take the system down even longer. So kicking the can down the road. Then they talk about here are the monitor cards for the flashers to runway 4 right, that they were failing. They found 2 bad cards, and that's what that's talking about there, to a different runway, not to runway 3 right, to runway 4 right. Then they move on to runway 3 right again, where here again they talk about kicking the can down the road. This hot mess has been handed off all too willingly many times. They're getting no support really to fix these things. He can't even schedule enough time to address all the issues that arise with this system every day. They talk about bad cable readings. They talk about the cable connections that need to be replaced, transformers and transceivers replaced, flashes replaced, repaired, and it just goes on and on how poor the condition of the approach lights are. Then they're talking about runway 4 left approach lights, which is the runway that has one of the offset localizers. It went into failure due to a lot of lights not operating properly, and they were reporting those lights being out. They found severely burned transceiver. At least a monitor was reporting the failed lights correctly, and that's one of the other issues, that they don't always do that. The lights on the panels upstairs in the tower that show the status of these approach light systems don't always work properly either. Then they go on to talk about the replacement of all three of them. Runway 3 right, the worst of all of them, is scheduled to be replaced due to its age and reliability. Runway 4 right is not even on the waterfall, and runway 4 left has not even been entertained, and this probably won't be. And this has been going on since I was there, starting in '97, and clearly before that. But I almost guarantee you nothing has changed between the end of 2022 and now. That they're still having the same problems or encountering even more or worse problems. Then they talk about the age of the system. It's over 30 years old with cable issues and other intermittent outages that have become very troublesome to them, and they've been trying to reach out for tech support above the facility to correct this. And one of the only answers they got was the fiscal year 27 for the replacement date of the runway 3 right approach lights. And then they go on here to talk about one of the nights they were working on the 3 right approach lights. They worked through the night, didn't make any significant progress. Cans were frozen into place. The fixtures were frozen into place. Primary connections of the transformers were loose, deformed, or poorly insulated. The edges of the cans were completely full of water. They had to be dug out by hand. The poor and loose connections can negatively affect the loop resistance and performance of the monitors. And they also had issues with connectors and poor splice insulation. Then they finished with, these direct cables have been buried under 6 roads and 4 drains. You can see it there. It's oddly written, but that's what they're saying. They have probably been damaged over the years by road and or drain maintenance. So why weren't they monitoring and looking at those? If they were doing maintenance on a road, they were exposed, why didn't they look at it? But they didn't. But this is unacceptable. It's just another cut and slice taken away from safety. Then they talk about here that he would support the fiscal year 27 for the replacement due to the issues he's been talking about. It is highly likely that these cables have been in the ground since the 70s and have outlasted their projected service life. There you go. They've been kicking the can, not even down the road, it's all over the place they've been kicking it, and just cutting into safety. Because they're not working properly and or out of service, they're not telling pilots, which would raise the minimums, but unfortunately they're not going to do that because it would impact their arrival rate. So let's move on to an email. Now we're going to move on to the email I talked about. I covered this in one of the voice recordings in a earlier post. And it was the one where they wanted to land on the closest runway to the terminal on the west side and then depart the runway from the west side to the furthest west runway away from the terminal. So that means that the tower had to cross airplanes to go over there, which is not what they do every day. But why did they do it? Runway 22 right, which is the one furthest west away from the airport, from the terminal that is, had 2 turnoffs closed, so the tower needed 5 miles in trail to ensure that aircraft are going to clear the runway properly. They didn't like that. The radar room didn't like that because it was going to impact their arrival rate. Instead, they did as they were ordered. And it forced the tower to cross 14 aircraft in between arrivals. Something the FAA does not want you to do, cross runways unnecessarily, when they could have clearly landed on runway 22 right and used the operation that they run normally every day. And he goes on to interject that it felt like a game or something someone did for fun. And then he talks about the choice between the ILS and the visual approach. From the tower perspective, he says, the visibility was unlimited. They could see the airplanes on a 17-mile final. Why didn't they stick to the standard safe plan that they run every day that's proceduralized? So he requested that they do an investigation on it. Well, the reason they want to do these procedures that are not commonly conducted in the tower is because, again, like I said, they have to keep that arrival rate up. So, like I've said before, capacity, then efficiency, then safety. There you go again. So we're going to move on to a couple of screenshots of the ground radar, and I'll discuss those in a moment. Now I'm going to discuss the two screenshots. We're going to start with this one here, and they're landing 3 runways with ILSs and IFR conditions. This aircraft here is landing here, as did these 3. They landed, turned off the runway, went into the terminal via this route. They were landing this runway, which is what this aircraft did. He's exiting, and this aircraft is landing on this runway. So if the weather dips below 800 or 2, we cannot do this anymore, because here's the critical area, in this area right in here. So to keep their capacity and arrival rate up, they're doing the triple approaches with total disregard of forecast, the concerns of the tower controllers, and the conditions at the airport. And I'll show you the impact of that. I've already showed you a couple of the impacts with previous postings, but the next screenshot will show that. I'm going to digress just for a moment to show you that when I was talking earlier about landing on the runway closest to the terminal, which is this one, and then taxiing aircraft from the terminal here across that runway to depart here. That just shows how derelict they are under duty for the safety of aircraft. Again, the mantra, capacity, then efficiency, then safety. That just shows how derelict they are, that they have aircraft crossing a runway unnecessarily. So if we move on to the next one, when the weather went below 800 or 2, this is the outcome. We could no longer go south because of the critical area. We were still landing on this runway during those poor weather conditions. So there's only 2 routes to take. Cross the aircraft here, stack them up here for crossing, which eventually this aircraft did as well, or take them up here as Southwest is doing, and you stop them up here to cross them. But since we couldn't cross the runways because they were landing on this runway, does this look efficient? They could have been taxiing this way into the terminal, saving them 8 to 10 minutes, 6 to 8 minutes, but no, they had them sit here. That is not efficient. What that is it keeps the arrival rate up and their capacity up. There's the arrival rate, he's on the ground. They don't care what happens after that. This is ridiculous. Landing on this runway and departing airplanes on this runway and crossing that runway is derelict. No regard for safety or the compromising positions they put the pilots and controllers in. So now I'm going to move on to a couple recordings. So what this is an audio recording between the tower controller and the pilot discussing the use of the offset localizer in poor weather conditions.
Delta 971, southbound Alpha, contact ground 121.8. Have a nice day.
121.8, Delta 971.
Thanks. Could you guys hang on? How was it being on the offset localizer in this weather condition?
It was close to minimums and pretty sporty.
Yeah, we're switching to the Zulu right now. I was just curious what it looks like from you guys. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I would definitely switch to the Zulu.
So there you go. Sporty at minimums, they're switching to the Zulu, which is the straight-in localizer. Why were they even doing it? Why are they bouncing back and forth between the localizers when they should have never been on the offset? I don't think I have to repeat it again. It's getting more and more obvious. And here's an exchange with another pilot.
Stuff 2858 connects it there. Alpha Quebec and contact ground 121.8.
Alpha Quebec ground 1218.
about 500 overcast now. Visibility 1.5 is accurate. Might want to think about going to Zulu.
Yeah, actually, that's smart that you said that. They're doing it right now. Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, it wasn't too scary for a little guy. Big guy maybe so.
Gotcha.
There you go again. Why are they utilizing the offset localizer at all, really, but during these poor weather conditions? I'll move on to the closure. There you go. More empirical data. They should not be utilizing that Yankee offset localizer. It's a dereliction of duty. They have other options. Staggereds, RNAV approaches with an offset, and running straight in ILSs side by side with a waiver. They can do it. The book now allows it, but they're choosing this option, and look at the chaos it causes. Unacceptable. I don't understand it. That is not what we're trained to do as air traffic controllers. It's safety above all. And they're putting the arrival rate and the capacity of the airport above that. It makes no sense to me. Maybe they don't have the skill set or the talent to run staggered approaches. I don't know. I don't care. But they're choosing the least safest option, which clearly so far up to this point I have shown. And then I go back to Secretary Duffy. He's threatened to withhold infrastructure funds for states that do not assist in ICE raids. Does that sound like a person that wants to correct safety issues? It does not. He doesn't have the intellect to do that. He wants to be a reality show soundbite. Now you throw the approach light systems into the fray, and the Swiss cheese holes are going to line up even quicker. This is unacceptable, and I can't believe Detroit is the only facility going through this, given what's happening at Newark and other places. And finally, I'd like to say congratulations to Heather Catallo and her team here at Channel 7 in Detroit for winning an Emmy on investigating the offset localizer. Well done, and it was an honor and a great pleasure to work with you guys. I'd also like to thank John Oliver and his team for his show Last Week Tonight, where they brought even more light to the air traffic system in the United States. Thank you very much for doing that. It is going to help, and anything we can do to get this out is going to help. Again, thank you for your time. I'm going to take a brief week off, and I'll get back at this again. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a little bit.